Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You are watching NBC News Now. It all changed 1 year ago today when the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic. States started shutting down, businesses closed, travel screeched to a halt, and life as we knew it suddenly vanished. Then the hospitals started filling up with patients and running out of ventilators and PPE. In the last year, more than 29 million Americans have contracted the virus. At least 500,000 have died here in the U.S. Dr. Anthony Fauci on the Today Show this morning, a year since he went before Congress to answer questions about the virus, predicting at that time that the worst was yet to come.
But I did not in my mind think that much worse was going to be 525,000 deaths. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Things look good, but we got to keep putting our foot to the pedal when it comes to public health measures.
Kirkland, Washington had one of the nation's first COVID outbreaks last year. So how are residents there doing now? NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is outside the Life Care Center in Kirkland. Steve, I know you were at that nursing home last year when half the staff was sick. Residents were dying. Take us back to March of 2020 and then tell us how things are now.
Well, it was an incomparable time. I mean, by this time, the national media had swarmed in here. The attention of the nation was focused on this one tiny nursing facility behind me because, as you mentioned, residents started getting sick. First, it was this mystery illness. There were premature diagnosis of pneumonia and a bizarre respiratory symptoms, and then they were taken to the hospital, and then the diagnosis of COVID started coming out, and the staff got sick. More residents got sick and then started dying, and it ended up that more than 36 residents in that facility their lives were taken by COVID. And then the nation obviously watched on. In the ensuing hours and days, first responders tried to do as much as they can to plan, to save people. And there was a parade of EMTs and ambulances and fire trucks that went in and out of this facility, and the fear was so palpable. And then, obviously, as time went on, the testing came in, there were more procedures in place, there was more PPE available. But what really happened is the city got their act together quickly. They recognized this as a serious problem that may develop into an epidemic, a pandemic, as future events went on. So they clamped down rather quickly. An emergency operations center was established rather quickly. After they got a handle on the situation here at the nursing center, case counts went down, death counts went down. This place now, a year later, is actually one of the least infectious places in the country. When you look at the major counties, the major metropolitan areas that make up the country, this is one of the slightest case counts that you'll find as far as cases, deaths, infection rate. And they've really done a good job over the past year of, again, clamping down, messaging to their citizens, and taking this very seriously. So it's really, it's done a 180. Now this nursing facility, no cases whatsoever. The staff here, about 90% inoculated. Residents here, about 95% of them have the vaccine as well. And that's true of the different city services around here. The fire department, also about 90% vaccinated. The case count was so good here that this was turned into a testing facility for some time. So just a general complete changeover in the way people feel and behave because they've managed to really stamp out the virus here to a pretty good degree, Allison. It's really heartening to see as somebody that was here a year ago answering very different questions when we last spoke.
Oh, yeah.
Back to you.
Steve, I know you've talked with some first responders there. What did they tell you about turning things around?
Well, I mean, they're obviously they're happy with the way the city was, responded and what they had to go through. But what they had to initially step into was incredible because this was truly the first wave, the first outbreak. The people I spoke to had been trained in, structure fires and swift water rescues and maybe even at times responding to mass crises like a shooting, but never anything on the level of an epidemic. There simply wasn't the training, wasn't the materials, wasn't the protective equipment for it. A lot of them were doing CPR on patients that had nothing to do with this, but in the days that ensued, they had no protection on, and they were doing hand-to-hand palpitations in CPR, and they thought that maybe in the past few days they may have been infected. So nearly half the fire department here had to go into quarantine. So that city had to figure out how to move resources around quickly and accurately. And then there was the fear of actually going into a hot zone like the one behind me. And I spoke to some of the firefighters here about that and about how they managed to get through it. Here's some of what they said.
Said I was a bit ostracized, but now looking back at it a year later, I think because we handled it so well, we've been safe, we have made all these changes. I really have a lot of pride in the fact that it happened right here in Kirkland, and that, like I said, that we met that challenge.
Yeah, a lot of the procedures that we did implement, you're seeing them across the country. So it was good that it happened here and that we were able to kind of rise to the challenge.
Another part of it is the medical community in collaboration with the health department, in collaboration with the local hospital that is very nearby here, all of them working together in concert to get more testing in this area, to get more protective materials in this area, to retrofit some of these hospitals to better take care of patients. And they were able to do that rather quickly. Allison?
Steve, it is wonderful to hear you say that it is heartening to be back there and to see the progress that they're making. I know for you as well, it has been so tough reporting on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine starting to roll out in California. NBC News correspondent Gotti Schwartz stopped by a pop-up vaccination site in a parking lot in Los Angeles. Just one of the creative ways California is getting to its hardest hit, most vulnerable communities.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, as we reflect back on where we were a year ago, this is a sign of the times. This is a parking lot for a mall. This is not normally a vaccination clinic or a COVID testing facility. This is an old Sears. And so today you have people coming in to get the COVID-19 vaccine, and specifically the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Here we've seen about 200, 300 of those vaccines given out at this site today, and then they're out. And that's the problem. Right now we're hearing that Johnson & Johnson vaccine. A lot of people here said that they wanted to get that vaccine because it seems just as effective when it comes to hospitalizations in extreme cases, as well as preventing death, but you only have to take one of them. So the people that we talked to, the essential workers that were working for Metro, transportation workers, restaurant workers, they were saying that they'd rather have a Johnson & Johnson vaccine and only have to make one appointment. But again, that Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we're dealing with issues of shortages here in Los Angeles, and that's the situation that we're seeing across the city. But right now the focus is getting marginalized communities of color to get vaccinated, because many of them are essential workers and they've been working this entire time. We talked to some people waiting in line. Here's what they had to say. When it comes to getting this vaccine, who are you thinking about here as you sit here before you go in?
Definitely my children and my parents. They're disabled and they have underlying health conditions, so I do want to be around them and help them out, you know.
And what does this vaccine represent to you?
A chance to help save lives. You know, if I could do it to save somebody else, even if I have to be the guinea pig for it, I'll do it.
And Allison, the main limiting factor right now here in Los Angeles continues to be supply. So we were at another facility just a little while ago. It was really telling because they said they had the capacity and they had the organization to give out 5,000 doses a day. They were ready to do so, but they could only give out 2,000 doses a day. So again, the limiting factor here is the supply of COVID-19 vaccine, not just the Johnson & Johnson, but the Pfizer, the Moderna. Authorities that we've talked to here say that they are trying to work on those kinks. They say that there is more coming in the next 2 or 3 weeks, but right now there is a pretty significant Johnson & Johnson vaccine shortage because of the supply chain that is affecting how many vaccines that they can give out on a daily basis here in Los Angeles. Back to you.
Meatpacking workers fed our country throughout this pandemic in danger of getting COVID at their plants. Now these essential workers aren't on the vaccine priority list in some states. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett is at a Smithfield Foods plant in South Dakota, where one of the first big outbreaks happened last spring.
In my department, it's very cold. It's blood and fat everywhere on the floor, and it's kind of messy sometimes. We see a lot of blood in the beginning. I don't like it.
That's Sandra Silbert talking about pre-pandemic life working at Smithfield's meat processing plant in South Dakota. Once COVID-19 hit last spring, Sandra said she had to make her own masks, praying every day she wouldn't get sick. That was nearly a year ago.
How safe do you feel going into work now?
It's not real safe. It's not social distance in this area. We don't have enough water for wash our hands. We don't have enough bathrooms. If it's the way they're treating people, it's not right.
The Smithfield plant was home to one of the first major outbreaks last spring.
This plant is incredibly important to our food supply in this country.
A Columbia University study found that early in the pandemic, as many as 1 in 12 COVID cases could be linked back to meatpacking plants. Across the country, the plants required to stay open by executive order to ensure America's food supply.
It was a bottleneck caused by this whole pandemic.
But a year later, these essential workers don't have clear guidance on when they'll get the vaccine.
It's been very rough for these workers. They've been through a lot.
In a statement, Smithfield said, quote, "We have taken extraordinary measures at our facilities to protect the health and safety of our employees, including pre-screening and on-site testing, barriers, masks, and shields, and enhanced air purification systems," adding that they've seen low relative case levels for months and that they've been communicating with employees about vaccine availability. Some locations like JBS in Colorado and Tyson in Iowa and Arkansas have held mass vaccination days for workers.
Here in South Dakota, though, workers may not see a vaccine until April.
The people working in that industry in our state that keeps our state going are immigrants and refugees. And to not prioritize them, is troublesome. It signals a lot of the things that we're advocating against, whether it's a misunderstanding or whether it's actual bigotry.
They don't care us. They don't care in the beginning of the pandemic, and they don't care right now. Because if we're a priority, they give us the vaccine. But when people ignore us like that, we feel alone.
The CDC advised that food processing workers get access to the vaccine before people older than 65 or younger people with underlying conditions. But nearly every state ignored that guidance. Now, just 12 states include meatpacking and food processing workers in their vaccine access allocation. In Colorado, 3,000 workers were paid to take the day off to get the vaccine after a push from the union to get the state and National Guard to allocate doses.
Do you think it needs to be such a push in order to prioritize worker safety?
We need systemic change. And these are things that our elected officials can help workers, get. In all of this, had we had this, some of this cooperation in place last year, I believe we would not have seen, 500,000 deaths in this country.
Back in South Dakota, workers are in phase 1E. After teachers and funeral service workers.
What keeps you here? Why still come to work at a place where you and your coworkers don't feel safe?
Because we need to feed our families. We have a family at home. We have a kids. We have to feed it. And we have to stand up for the country. The country give you too many things to us. They open the door for us. It's only one way to give you back to the country. Stand up.
Maura joins me live now. Maura, the numbers are just crazy. Nearly 22,000 meatpacking workers have been infected with or exposed to COVID-19. 132 have died, according to the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. If these workers are essential, why aren't they a priority in all states?
Right. That's the $1 million question, Allison. And I put that question towards the South Dakota Department of Health, and they kind of skirted around the answer, responding to me saying that they look forward to vaccinating essential food service workers in our next priority group. Given South Dakota's record progress on vaccination efforts, provided an increase in vaccine allocation from the federal government, such should start in the near future. So not an answer on how exactly they came about the reasoning and how they allocated vaccines and how the phases worked out. And what's interesting is that from the beginning of the pandemic, it was companies like Smithfield, JBS, Cargill plants across the country that weren't having the right safety precautions for those workers. And that's why we saw the outbreaks happen. But now the onus is on the states, because the CDC issued that guidance saying how important it was for these food processing workers to have access. And yet every state is doing it differently. And so that's the problem, is that state by state, there's different guidance and they can kind of go with whatever they're looking for. But at the end of the day, say these workers have not been able to work remotely for the entirety of a year, except for when the plant shut down because of the outbreaks. And when you hear from people like Sandra, who says that they just want to put food on the table for Americans and help keep the country going, Allison.
Maura, I know Iowa did prioritize its food workers, but many of them turned down that shot. Here's what editor Art Cullen of the Storm Lake Times told MSNBC's Steph Rule this morning.
I think it boils down to one word: trust. They don't trust the government. Most of the employees here in Storm Lake are immigrants, primarily from Latin America. The way the state tried to make the workers feel safe was threatening to bar unemployment benefits if they refused to return to a potentially unsafe workplace last April.
Maura, tell us more about the hurdles getting these workers vaccinated.
Well, in addition to the trust issue that Art was discussing, there's obviously also the trust issue in the companies providing vaccines for these workers. A lot of them, like we mentioned, immigrant and refugee workers. Sandra mentioned a lot of her coworkers don't want to get the vaccine because they think it'll make them sick. They don't have trust in the safety that the company is going to be administering them. And the big hiccup there that both Tunisia, who you heard from in the piece before, and Sandra, is that this is an English-only state. In South Dakota, Iowa is a similar situation. And so when they're not getting active communication and education in English, these people who work here don't speak English as their first language. There's a variety of languages present. And so they need nonprofits like Tunisia's group to be translating those materials to get adequate education. Otherwise, all they're getting is misinformation or lack of information, which leads to further vaccine hesitancy. Allison?
All right, Maura Barrett, thank you. Remember the Diamond Princess cruise ship? Back in February of 2020, a major coronavirus outbreak on the Diamond Princess forced passengers and crew to quarantine on board. Today, a survivor of that horror told MSNBC's Katie Tur he's still feeling the effects of the virus.
I'm an enigma. The doctors cannot figure out what the heck I've got. I am stuck in a wheelchair, but I'm alive and I'm healthy, and I'm healthy in terms of being able to be awake all day, read, do a little work on the computer, although I only have use of one finger now. So we don't know what the long-term effects are of this. I didn't start seeing the damage that COVID had till a good 4 months after I had the virus.
Let's bring in emergency medicine physician Dr. Anand Swaminathan. Dr. Swaminathan, we are still learning so much about the long-term effects of COVID, but Carl there was telling Katie Tur he was once healthy, now he's in a wheelchair. What should our viewers know about cases like his?
There's so little we know about long COVID or the long haulers. And we're learning as we go, and we're trying to collect more information. There's just very limited data still. It's a lot of anecdotes, but we need to get actual collection of information, prospective studies. But Allison, I think the main thing that this shows us is that this isn't a black or white thing. It isn't survival versus death. There are a lot of people who are having long-term sequelae of this. And what it stresses is the need to not get COVID, which I know sounds simple, but there are things that we can do to avoid this. Masking, avoiding indoor situations, and getting vaccinated when we can. It's not just about preventing death. It's about preventing these long-term sequelae as well.
Yeah, some of which, in Carl's case, are really serious. Let's talk vaccinations. Right now, just over 10% of the U.S. population is fully vaccinated. Almost 20% of Americans have gotten at least one shot. Are you happy with where the rollout is, how it's going right now?
I think we're doing a good job. We're over 2 million doses a day. And remember, we were talking about 100 million in 100 days. We're going to far surpass that number. We're getting to 2 million a day. Yeah. We need to push that even further to 3. We're seeing still issues with supply, but those are starting to get fixed. I think near the end of this month, they're going to be even closer to being fixed. Maybe by the end of next month, they're going to be completely gone. And what that means is that we need to make sure we're expanding to those high-risk communities, that we're doing more work reaching out to communities and figuring out how to do this best. More mobile units, using that J&J vaccine where it can be really powerful with a single dose in people who maybe have a harder time getting to these locations, getting follow-up, making their appointments. We need to really expand what we're doing beyond just those mass vaccination sites. And we're seeing some really creative solutions. So I think we're doing a really good job with vaccination. We're far ahead of where I thought we would be at this point, and we just need to keep pushing.
Mm-hmm. Pfizer's CEO is encouraging everyone to get whatever vaccine they can. Here he is on CNBC's Squawk Box this morning.
But I will tell you in full honesty what I tell to my relatives or my family when they're asking me what to do. And I tell them, if you try to get an appointment for a Pfizer vaccine and the center will give it to you in 2 months and you can get an appointment for another vaccine, let's say this week, I urge you go and do the J&J vaccine.
Hey, listen, I'm here for that. As soon as I can get a vaccine, I will take whichever one is available to me. But is there any reason, Dr. Swaminathan, why someone should not get the first vaccine they can? Would you also recommend to your patients just get what's available?
Absolutely. I think we have to get what's in front of us, and we can't wait. We can't be picky. We can't be choosy, because the amount of protection from all 3 vaccines approved in the U.S. is incredible in terms of really getting sick, the severe cases of COVID, which is what we're trying to prevent. Yes, you might get a little bit of some sniffles and a little bit of cough, but you're not going to get severe infections. And that's really what we have to be avoiding. It's great to hear the CEO of Pfizer saying that. I think every health professional is saying the same thing. Get whatever vaccine you can get as soon as you can get it.
Dr. Swaminathan, always a pleasure to see you. I think we said a couple of times this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison. Take care.
Time to check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the very latest headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison, we're going to start with some news on the energy front. OPEC sees strong oil demand happening in the second half of the year. But even with a recovery, OPEC says it won't be able to make up for their revenue losses that they saw last year. And some news out of France. That country is easing some of its COVID-19 restrictions on international travel outside of Europe. The list includes Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, to name a few. The Minister of Health there says those countries either have high vaccination rates or low infection numbers. Travelers will still need to provide a negative COVID test that's less than 72 hours old, though. And heading down to Mexico, that country might become the world's largest legal recreational marijuana market. Mexico's Congress took the first step in approving a bill that decriminalizes marijuana use. It has the support of President López Obrador, but critics worry transnational companies and not local farmers will benefit most from this new law. And over in Poland, same-sex couples and single parents who identify as gay will be banned from adopting children. Polish authorities announced the policy hours before the EU adopted a major gay rights resolution, intensifying tensions between the two over LGBTQ rights. And Facebook will now let content creators earn ad revenue from short-form videos on the platform. The move comes as other social media platforms like Snapchat and Twitter are also experimenting with ways of paying content creators. Allison, that'll do it for me. I'll send it back to you.
All right, Simone, thanks so much. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi celebrating the American Rescue Plan on the first anniversary of the pandemic.
Here we are a year later, as we observe that sad moment and everything that has ensued. We also today are celebrating legislation that will make a tremendous difference.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell has more.
Democrats are, in fact, doing a victory lap, passing this $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. I've lost count of the number of press conferences House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leader Chuck Schumer have had regarding this COVID-19 bill, but they're thrilled. This is a big big piece of legislation full of Democratic and progressive priorities. And Speaker Pelosi wants her members to go home to their district and do exactly that, brag about it, tell their constituents that this was a Democratic bill full of Democratic priorities, and to point out the amount of money that people are going to get, the amount of health care subsidies people are going to get, not be shy about this piece of legislation. The reason they're pushing that is because they're taking lessons from 2009 during the recession, when the Obama administration passed a $800 billion stimulus bill. President Barack Obama back then didn't want to sign his name to it, said that the money will speak for itself. Well, it didn't really work out that way in the midterm elections. So what Democratic leaders want this time, they want their voters to know that this was a Democratic bill passed only by Democrats with unified Republican opposition. President Biden signed that legislation into law today ahead of his big address, so you could be sure he is also going to be touting this $1.9 trillion relief bill. Allison.
The White House says the latest stimulus checks will start hitting American bank accounts this weekend. President Biden signing that relief bill, of course, this afternoon ahead of his first primetime speech tonight, reflecting on 1 year of the pandemic. NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joining me now from Washington, D.C. Kelly, the White House says the president will level with Americans on the state of the pandemic tonight. What do you expect that to sound like?
Good to be with you, Allison. I think it will be a mix of the president noting the very painful year the country has been through and the very human cost of more than 500,000 lives taken by COVID and how extraordinary that really is, as well as acknowledging that with things like the mitigation methods that people have been embracing over this past year and the advancement of vaccines, now more and more Americans receiving those shots, that there is some light. But that's a careful balance for the president, because you don't want to say everything is better and encourage people to sort of resume life as it once was, but to have a more measured approach. So that will be a tough thing for the president to thread, to acknowledge the loss, the economic hardship, the really once in a lifetime kind of experience we've all been through, and at the same time trying to note something more hopeful. That he will do in part through the policies he's trying to put in place, like the first legislative win of his presidency with the COVID relief bill. But we've also been told this isn't about the bill itself. It's really about the 1 year mark and the road ahead. Certainly the president can talk about that achievement and what it will mean to people, but don't view this, at least based on the guidance we've been receiving, as another celebration of the bill. There will be a lot of that in the weeks to come in terms of the practical and foreseeable implementation phase that comes next. People getting their checks, states and schools getting the resources they need to make changes, and so on and so on, wanting to highlight all the different parts of that. So tonight, a mix of what will be a somber tone as well as an acknowledgement that things will get better. Allison?
Kelly, the president, the first lady, Vice President Harris, and the second gentleman will start touring the country to promote that relief bill next week. Why is this victory lap so very important?
Part of what they're looking at is a chance to make certain that Americans know what this legislation will mean to them personally. There are a lot of financial elements that will affect tens of millions of Americans, from the direct economic impact payments to those who are affected by joblessness with an extension of unemployment benefits. There are food programs that will be supported with increases there, as well as a child tax credit. So families that have children will have an immediate benefit of owing less taxes. A tax credit really puts money in your pocket. And those are things that they want Americans to understand, as well as things that affect institutions and larger organizations like state governments and schools. So this is about making sure that people understand it, and also politically making sure that the Biden administration gets credit for what they have done and extending that to Democrats. There's a real feeling among the many Obama administration alums in the Biden White House that there wasn't enough of that done when the former president, President Barack Obama, signed into law the economic rescue when the economic crisis was happening, and that they put it into place and sort of didn't take the celebratory victory lap associated with it. And again, that's in political terms, but they felt they didn't get enough credit for that, and they want to make sure that this is an educational rollout, and as a byproduct of that, there's a chance for Democrats to say they made promises, they delivered on them, and a way to give some strength to this still new administration that the president has been able to accomplish something he set out to do. Allison?
Kelly, you have covered the White House long enough to know there are few breaks for the president. So now that this relief bill is signed, it is law. What is the next push from the White House?
Well, certainly it will continue to be this implementation phase, but there are other big issues. Looking at some of the other crises that they face, dealing with the economy, dealing with certainly issues like infrastructure. Could that be a place where the president would be able to get some kind of bipartisanship that he says he really wants to achieve? Also doing other things with respect to immigration, with voting rights. There are lots of other priorities. What the White House has not given us is a sense of exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the next series. But we know what some of those key things are. And for the president, it's also about making certain that he is listening to what the country is saying to him, as well as coming through on some of the things he promised as candidate Biden. Allison?
Kelly, all of the living former presidents but Donald Trump are appearing in a new video. They are urging Americans to get vaccinated in that video. Today, the White House also commented on the COVID situation that the Biden administration inherited. What are they saying about that?
Well, one of the things they are talking about is the fact that President Trump, who, of course, was responsible for launching what was known in his time as Operation Warp Speed, where they got the vaccine process moving. The Biden administration will give some credit where that is due, but they do say there were big shortfalls in the implementation, especially that point from where vaccines were distributed to states and how those vaccines on an individual basis got into various people's arms, that was a gap in the planning from the former administration. Kate Bedingfield, who's the president's communications director, outlined some of this today when she was speaking with Andrea Mitchell.
Well, Andrea, I don't think there's any question that we could have been in a better position if there had been a more aggressive and comprehensive vaccine program and a more aggressive and direct communication about the importance of wearing masks. But, you know, let's look at where we've come since January 20th, since President Biden took office. We've really made a whole of government comprehensive effort. We've made enormous strides. So we're now to the point where, as the president has said, we have enough vaccine for all adults to be vaccinated by the end of May.
And while former President Trump has put out a statement reminding Americans that he was on the front end of vaccines, because now it's President Biden's problem to deal with, and the years going forward as the country returns to normal, he may get more and more of the credit for picking it up from this point and getting it to the next phase where Americans can get back to normal. There will always be a battle about who gets credit for various things, but the Biden administration strongly says that it's had to do a lot of new work, and that's what they're going to be talking about tonight and going forward. Allison?
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much. A year into the pandemic, and the stock market is booming. The Dow and the S&P both hitting record highs today. The Dow closed up 188 points, finishing the day at 32,485. All three indexes rallying today. One of the reasons, better than expected jobless claims. But those numbers are still incredibly high. 712,000 Americans filing for first-time unemployment benefits last week. The unemployment rate in this country still above 6% through last month, with more than 10 million people out of work. Let's bring in Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver to talk about what's going on. Caleb, it's so good to see you. It feels like it's been a little while. Let's hit the markets first. What have they been rallying around this week besides the jobless claims today?
Sure. It was the expectation that this would be signed and that more money is coming in to the hands of Americans who will hopefully spend it. But you have this combination, Allison, of a lot of government spending, low interest rates, and relatively tame inflation. And that recipe has meant nothing but good stuff for stocks for the past year, actually for the past 2 years. And we know more spending's coming. So investors have been way out in front of that. As you know, you and I have been talking all year. In fact, I was with you a year ago when the market fell 9.5% today, a year ago. But investors have been way in front of this recovery, and now they've been leaning into it with both hands and their wallets.
So we know President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan today. What do economists like most in that bill? Is it the stimulus checks? Is it the extra unemployment benefit extension? What do the financial experts think will best help this economy get back on track?
Sure. Well, I think it depends on who you talk to, but those on the left, the more progressive, say this is directed right at low and middle income families that need it the most. And for a family of four, this could be about $5,400 if everyone gets a check and they earn under the threshold. So that's a fair amount of money, and it's tax free. So the spending that should come from that should be significant. Remember, in the first stimulus bill back in June, and even this one back in December, a lot of folks saved that money. The personal savings rate rose to all-time highs, but a lot of folks spent too because we had nothing to do, and we were doing a lot of ordering online. There's so much demand now for the leisure and hospitality activities that we've been not able to do in the past 9-10 months that people are ready to go out, buy vacations, put money down on airplane tickets, spend money at their restaurants and their local businesses. So that's something they're looking forward to. That consumer spending, which drives 70% of U.S. GDP, is what economists are hoping for to drive this next wave of growth.
So let's talk about what's potentially missing. I mean, I know the bill was just signed hours ago, but we've been talking all week about potentially needing more COVID relief down the road. What else is it going to take to bring jobs back, to get this economy where we need it to be? Because we know there's just a very long road ahead.
Sure. And the sluggishness in the labor market is in the services sector. The services sector is where hospitality lives. That's places where we eat. That's bars, that's restaurants, that's salons, that's travel, that's hotels. And that's depressing. It's going to take a while. That's not something that's going to snap back on as soon as everyone gets vaccinated. It's going to take a while for that to level, go back to cruising altitude, so to speak, even though people are already booking their cruises. So that's a big part of it. But some of these industries actually got money in this relief bill, including the airline industry, including Amtrak, if you can believe it, even though they didn't spend $1 billion from the last stimulus plan. So there's that. But there's also not a ton going on here with small businesses that may need a little bit more help to get through this. We know what happened with the PPP plan, and it did help many businesses, but a lot of that money was not well used or well distributed. We're going to probably need to see more there. There is some money targeted at cities and states that have had a real shortfall in tax revenue. They're going to need some more help as well to get back on their feet fiscally.
All right, so we got to talk about the markets a little bit more because it is so remarkable that after a year of shutdowns, lockdowns, health crises, financial crises, that the market is where it is. I mean, the Dow trading above 32,000. Talk to us more about how on earth this has happened during a pandemic, Caleb.
Yeah, well, for a while there was what we call TINA, no alternative. There is no alternative to stocks because interest rates were so low and the yield on government bonds and fixed income securities was so low that investors could not make any money from them. So everybody was pushing into stocks. And then we started to get that stimulus back in June. You and I were talking again. It was a year ago the stock market fell 9.5%. Then it went on to fall 35% when it was finally over with, and the fastest bull market recovery in history because investors were way ahead of this. But the stock market was driven for most of 2020 by the big tech stocks that we all know of: Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Netflix, Google. Those drive market returns because they're the biggest stocks. Well, in the last 2 or 3 months, that has shifted to the recovery stocks: travel, transportation, financials, energy, and manufacturing. Those don't make for record highs and all the excitement that the big tech stocks do, but that's where the money's been. Now we're seeing a balancing out, and all sectors are rising.
Caleb, it is always terrific to have you on, especially when we're talking about the good stuff. Stimulus checks going out, the market's doing well. Thank you so much. I hope we see you again soon.
Always a pleasure, Allison.
The judge in Derek Chauvin's murder trial reinstating a third-degree murder charge in the death of George Floyd on day 3 of jury selection. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster is outside the courthouse in Minneapolis with more.
Hi there, Allison. Yeah, there's no longer that cloud of uncertainty hanging over this trial as we continue with this jury deliberation process. And you mentioned that third-degree murder charge. Let's step back and just remind our viewers how we got to this point. That was actually the first charge against former Minneapolis Police Department officer Derek Chauvin back in the summer in the weeks after George Floyd was killed. That charge was eventually upgraded to second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter, but it was in the fall, in October, when the trial judge in this case dismissed that third-degree murder charge. Well, after some back and forth with both sides, the defense arguing, the prosecution arguing, and an appeals process, multiple appeals that went all the way up to the Minnesota Supreme Court, we now know that the defense, or that third-degree murder charge, will go back to the trial judge, and the trial judge this morning decided to put it on and reinstate it officially. So now officially, Derek Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. As that is happening, we are still watching this jury selection process that is well underway. Of course, we had to get through that third-degree murder process and question before we got to this point. Listen to that moment this morning in court and listen to how the judge explained it.
When intent is directed at a single person, this is a legal principle that they have established now as precedent. Single acts directed at a single person fall within the gambit of murder in the third degree. Accordingly, I am bound by that. I have to apply the rule. Murder in the third degree is reinstated as originally charged.
And as far as that jury, we're continuing to make progress. We are almost halfway there in seating this overall jury. We know that they are aiming for 12 jurors and 2 alternates in this process. What do we know about them? We know, as of now, the majority of them are overwhelmingly men. The ages range between 20 and 40 years old. There is one woman who is apparently biracial. We know overall there's about at least two people of color. All of these are assumptions that are being made because there's only one reporter in the courtroom, and we're not able to ask or approach the jurors and ask them any questions. So those are the assumptions being made. But in the questioning, you learn that they are familiar with the George Floyd case. Most of them have seen the video, but the key thing here is all of them have said they are willing to put aside any preconceived notions or ideas they have about this case and be an impartial juror. And that's something that the judge has been asking and emphasizing all throughout this process. This process will continue day after day. We know that opening statements are set for March 29th. Allison?
They can determine who lives, dies, and goes free. Juries in America hold tremendous power, but suffer from a lack of diversity. The Equal Justice Initiative, uncovering evidence of racial discrimination in jury selection in every state, saying that research suggests that compared to diverse juries, all white juries tend to spend less time deliberating, make more errors, and consider fewer perspectives. MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee tackles this issue in the latest episode of his Into America podcast. Tremaine, you're talking about lack of diversity in juries, and here we are in the middle of jury selection in the Derek Chauvin trial. He is charged with murdering George Floyd. Let's talk about the challenges of building a fair and diverse jury, especially in high-profile cases like this one. Why doesn't this happen more often?
Thanks so much for having me, Allison. First of all, it begins in the summons phase, basically. The way we, pull jurors in the first place, or potential jurors, is through scanning DMV records and voter registration records. So you're already having a certain group of people who are already in the system. But then once you actually get into the trial phase, in the jury selection phase, the prosecution and defense attorneys can basically strike potential jurors for what they perceive as maybe conflicts. But often what happens is they end up using race as a way to kind of strike down jurors. Now, that's not legal. You can't legally strike someone because they're black or Hispanic or white. But sometimes the prosecutor, if the defendant, is a black man, maybe they're figuring they might have a good shot at prosecuting this person if the jury is more diverse. And so there's a wide range of reasons why we don't have fair and diverse trials. But I spoke with a guy named Will Snowden who started something called the Juror Project in New Orleans, and he's a lawyer, and he broke it down something like this. Let's take a listen.
Can we actually produce a jury of your peers that are fair and impartial? Now, I would say you can't, because we all walk into that courtroom with our experiences, with intersectional identities, with perspectives that we just don't leave at the door.
Allison, part of this is philosophical, right? Like you have the actual mechanics of the way jury selection works, but then you have this idea of what is fair and impartial anyway, right? We all arrive at the courtroom and the courthouse with our own experiences and preconceived notions. It's still a matter of, can you set those aside, or Will Snowden will argue, can you set those aside and just base a case on the merits of the actual evidence? And that's the question. So this kind of idea of what fairness or objectivity is kind of silly anyway, since we all arrive with our different filters.
Yeah, we all bring something to the table when we go to a jury. It's hard to leave who you are and your past experiences behind. Tremaine, I know you talked to a juror who served on the trial for Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke, charged with murdering Laquan McDonald in 2014. Charlene Cook was the sole black juror on that trial. What did she tell you about her experience?
That's right, Allison. You can only imagine the pressure. The Laquan McDonald case was a big case. It was one of the bigger ones before we got to George Floyd. And in Chicago, in Cook County, she was the lone black juror. And she talked about this idea of pressure all around her. She wanted to do a good job. She wanted to be as fair and impartial as she could possibly be in reviewing the evidence. But the tension and all the pressure was palpable. You could almost cut it with a knife, she said. But let's take a listen to Ms. Cook in her own words.
They expect us to be a certain way. They expect us to think a certain way just because this is what they have in their mind of us. We're perceived to really not to have feelings. They think because you live in the inner city, we don't have feelings. You know, whatever's said about you, whatever way they think you are, it's automatically, but it's not.
Charlene Cook said from the very moment she walked in, all eyes were on her. She would go to make a reference about something and everyone would look or to see what the quote unquote black lady had to say. But she also said from the very beginning, Jason Van Dyke's, defense attorneys already had it out for her. That's how she felt. There was so much pressure coming from the other side of the courtroom that she pushed through to do a good job. But she said it was a very, very uncomfortable experience, but one that she was, proud. She doesn't regret a single thing of serving on that jury. But she said it was really tough, a lot of pressure.
What enormous pressure and stress. It's just incredible. Tremaine, we always love that you come on and share your podcast with us. Another great episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Allison.
We have lost so much and learned so much in the last 12 months. This pandemic tearing apart families, taking away loved ones, wiping out jobs and savings. But Americans have also come together to fight this virus and honor our frontline heroes. Here's a look back at our year with COVID.
The coronavirus is now in all 50 states.
Millions of Americans already furloughed or laid off.
How long do you think that Americans need to be in this posture of staying at home?
It's at least going to be several weeks.
New York City is now the epicenter of this crisis in the U.S.
At the rate that we're putting people on ventilators, it's only a matter of time until we run out.
Lawmakers finally reached a deal on that historic $2 trillion plan.
Do you think we are already in recession?
We may well be in a recession.
The 85,000 cases in the U.S. now, the most in the world.
If we do things together well, almost perfectly, we could get in the range of 100,000 to 200,000 fatalities. We don't even want to see that.
That I know, but you kind of take my breath away with that, because what I hear you saying is that's sort of the best case scenario.
More than 272 million Americans now being told to stay inside.
It is very strange how one individual can get infected and have either mild or no symptoms, and another individual could rapidly deteriorate.
New guidance is coming today advising Americans to wear cloth masks.
So you're wearing this mask in case you are sick and you're trying not to spread it.
This nationwide push to flatten the curve may be showing signs of working.
The true heroes, those healthcare workers.
We will get through this. We will fight.
Possible breakthrough in the fight against the coronavirus.
Promising news now about this drug called remdesivir.
This is a medicine that's really for the most severe patients.
All 50 states have eased their lockdown restrictions.
What does it mean to start having the boardwalk and the Jersey Shore?
It's a big day. We're slowly but surely getting back on our feet.
Other small towns just like it trying to reopen.
Tonight is the night baseball fans have been waiting for.
Behind me, what you see here is what we're allowed to view of the secluded NBA bubble.
Alarming new warning about the fall.
The countdown to the first day of school in person is like a ticking time bomb unless we do this right.
Is there really a safe way to open up college campuses?
I think the answer is no.
Troubling new signs of a new coronavirus surge in the U.S. during a week that's seen the nation's death toll top 200,000.
It's a lot to wake up to. It's extraordinary. The president and first lady have both tested positive for the coronavirus.
The president's doctor says he could be discharged as early as today.
Cases continuing to rise at an alarming rate across the U.S.
And for the first time, rural areas in the Midwest are being hit really hard.
The CDC is now out with some urgent advice.
It has to do with wearing a mask. I mean, we knew that it was to protect other people.
There's more and more evidence coming that says that it also helps you.
Hopes are now turning to a vaccine.
Pharmaceutical company Moderna announcing early results of its vaccine trial.
What do you think the timeline is for these vaccine candidates to be available?
By the end of December.
It's a momentous day, isn't it?
Much needed help in the pandemic now starting to arrive in the form of those insulated boxes carrying vials of Pfizer's vaccine.
There is a hunger problem in this country. Of course, the toll of this pandemic has so much to do with the need.
The work you guys here are doing, God's work. This is 20,000 meals that will go on tables for people here that are hungry.
That troubling post-holiday coronavirus surge.
This is a familiar pattern that we have seen.
Officials across the country are scrambling to speed up the distribution process.
That's a line for shots at just one clinic.
New cases have been dropping dramatically.
Can you reassure teachers who are listening right now that it is safe for them to go back to school even if they are not vaccinated?
Teachers should be a priority.
It's a simple but emotional tribute to remind us of the 500,000 Americans who've lost their lives to COVID-19. But there are also growing signs that we are gaining ground.
These workers in Kentucky are packing up and shipping out vials of the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
They kept all the patients out of the hospital.
Surprise and significant developments.
President Biden saying there will be enough vaccine for every U.S. adult by the end of May.
Millions of Americans finding out what they can and cannot do after a year of lockdown.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.